think I'd have plenty of room here, and I don't. Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler, and I'm trying to make myself a little bit bigger. Just want to show you the topics that we're going to be discussing here today. And the first one is, which side is winning, Trump or the rule of law? And let's just go for that right now. There'll be more to come. So let me turn that off. And here I am. The issue I raise here, which side is winning, I wish I could feel confident I could tell you which side is winning. This is one of the most complicated pictures that I think we've ever seen in a battle of this sort. There are so many different levels of it. one important level about the battle between Trump and the rule of law is that he's going to be the Republican nominee. And there's a genuine chance, people seem to believe, that he will become president of the United States. And there, with that scenario, Trump versus the rule of law, he is basically telling us that if he gets elected, the rule of law in America is done. He's going to weaponize the Justice Department. He's going to run over a variety of constitutional prohibitions. He's going to transform the civil service from something in which people pledge to protect and defend the Constitution into something where people have pledged to the supreme leader their utter fealty to him, so that nobody's going to say, no, we can't do that, like the Justice Department did when Trump tried to get the Justice Department to commit crimes to help him overturn the election. He's got, the rule of law is in his sights. But we're also watching a major other dimension of Trump versus the rule of law. And that's the question, will the rule of law be able to hold Donald Trump accountable for crimes that he manifestly committed, some of which I keep describing as the most serious in the history of the nation. I mean, what's robbing a bank compared to trying to overthrow the constitutional order? And elections are the foundation of that. He tried to steal an election. He tried to seize power. That is the game. He's committed a variety of crimes, and I have argued that we are not required as citizens to give him the presumption of innocence. It would be foolish for us to give him the presumption of innocence if we've been paying enough attention that we can see that in these indictments in the January 6th committee and in what we've seen with our own eyes, we know that this guy committed some very serious crimes. It's just not really beyond doubt. It's the jury's job to give him the presumption of innocence, meaning his guilt has to be presented in the court according to its rules. And we've been wanting these trials to occur because whether it's true that no one is above the law is a question in Trump's era here. It's never been before, unless you count the Civil War, where the right of secession was just lawlessly asserted. But the rule of law would have said we shouldn't have had a civil war. I'm not going to go there right now. But we've got something going on in America right now where there's a battle going on between this particular criminal and the system, which is why we've got things like gag orders, which he flaunts. We've got a man who is systematically doing what he did with respect to creating January 6th, which is sending out messages into his supportive base that he knows that there's a segment of his following that's prepared to do things, to commit political violence in the service of his goals. So he threatens judges, he threatens witnesses, and he threatens the juries, and that's what the gag orders. So one of the little side battles is, will these gag orders manage to get him to stop wielding the weapon of political violence against the rule of law, the way he's attacking and trying to delegitimize the whole system, which is, besides the political violence, he's basically saying that this process, which we've all been able to see, is unfolding in a very scrupulous way It's not a Biden prosecution. We can see he's been completely hands off. And if there's been any problem on the side of law enforcement and the Department of Justice, it's clearly been the reluctance of Merrick Garland to hold accountable the biggest criminal, and he just focused on all those hundreds of people who were carrying out the insurrection that Donald Trump has been adjudicated in Colorado, tried to launch that insurrection. And Garland sat on his hands for a couple years, and we're paying a real price for that. Who would have thought, like Liz Cheney said, it simply cannot be that a president would attempt to steal an election over however she put it. I mean, she had a way of describing the crimes committed by Donald Trump in an attempt to hold on to power that he had lost in a clean and fair election. It cannot be the case in year one. I mean, see, that wasn't her language either. We all see these crimes being committed. And she was on the January 6th committee, and she knows what has been shown. And then not have that case fully prosecuted and completed in time for the next election, which this same guy is contending for as the leader of one of America's two major political parties. But that's the situation in which we find ourselves. A little aside, I love these hosts on MSNBC. I don't think that's really too strong. I mean, I got my critiques of everybody, but that's just, like who I am. Nothing's perfect. But these are really very bright people. And I'm thinking at the moment of Nicole Wallace and Ari Melber, because I recall how much emphasis they and other people too, I don't remember who all the faces are with, heard again and again. This is the first time that a former American president has been tried in a criminal court, or however they put it. And it's true. And that is not a small thing. But I think that emphasis really misses what's really extraordinary about this situation. It's not that we're trying a former president. Had it not been for Gerald Ford giving Nixon a pardon, we would have had some kind of a trial of Richard Nixon, say in 1975. And that would have been historic, but let's not get too over excited about what it is. Other countries have done it, as a variety of some of these legal minds that we see on MSNBC have been talking about. That other countries like France, I think, what was his name, Sarkozy, anyway, and the Italians tried Berlusconi, who is somewhat Trump-like. But other countries have managed to hold former top people accountable, and it didn't cause earthquakes. But this is an extraordinary situation because of not just he's a former president. The trial of Nixon would have been something that people would pay attention to, but it would not have been like the country's sort of teetering on some kind of an edge here. It would have been conducted in a businesslike way. Richard Nixon would have behaved himself like the kind of decent person that he had spent his whole career acting like he was. It's not because Donald Trump is a former president that this is a really serious battle at a variety of levels. It's because this particular former president is a thug. That's the problem. He's willing to wield political violence. He's willing to break all the laws. He's willing to lie to tens of millions of people and convince them somehow of things that are obviously not true. It's far from a political on the contrary, our, the political appointee, Merrick Garland, was compelled against his will to go after this former president. But that's because this former president behaves the way he does. I mean, he is continually challenging everything that could constrain him. You know, if you look at, for example, at the documents case, you can see that the authorities were so eager to resolve the problem of his having these documents in a way that was smooth and didn't involve a confrontation. They waited so long for each thing that Trump refused to do. They just bent over backwards to get this resolved. They did not want a fight. Trump essentially laid out the gauntlet, the way he defied subpoenas, lied to the authorities. You just couldn't let that be. And so the people who were politically motivated to avoid a confrontation with Trump, but whose job it is to defend the rule of law in America, just had to investigate, had to go to a judge, lay out the case that there probably a crime has been committed, and have a judge sign a warrant. There was no FBI raid. The FBI raid idea is part of the war against the rule of law. This was a legal process, and it was required by the way Trump was behaving, challenging to hang on to things that endanger national security and that were a violation of the law for him to have taken in the first place, which he had been told several times by his own people when his presidency was over. This guy's a thug. He refuses to, he just continually makes war on anything that would constrain his freedom of action. He's precisely the wrong kind of person to have the powers of the presidency. So Trump versus the rule of law. So let's take a look at the sort of the state of play in terms of which side is winning. There have been some really good developments. The prosecution in the case in New York in the last couple of weeks has, in the last week, I guess. They got a jury selected. There was an accomplishment. In all of Donald Trump's attempts to delay the trial were defeated by judge after judge after judge. There's a force out there that's really working now to hold him accountable. Not just Jack Smith, but the DA in Manhattan and the judges who are basically pressing this forward that he's going to have a trial, despite all of his efforts to block it. That's not nothing. And every day in the news, we're getting laid out a picture of Donald Trump acting in the world. I'm not sure how much people are going to be able to get from this picture. It is kind of a complicated picture, and it operates at various levels. We're going to be hearing about, his relationship with a porn star and with a Playmate centerfold. Americans used to respond to things like that in a way that you wouldn't want if you're a candidate. And we're going to hear about just all the deception that went on with these business records. I mean, that's what Michael Cohen's going to tell us about. But we also hear about the arrangement between Trump and Pecker. People have run out of puns, I think, but with the National Enquirer, doing something that wouldn't be illegal if it had nothing to do with a political campaign, but is illegal if it does have to do with a political campaign, because it's a violation of important campaign laws having to do with donations, having to do with keeping information away from that the people are entitled to know who are going to be voting. But it's a complicated picture. It's a combination of, but it might percolate because, on the one hand, the fraudulent receipts of reimbursing Michael Cohen, falsifying business records, that will remind us of the civil case for which he's been penalized roughly $500 million, which is another place where the rule of law has been scoring some points. Oh, and added to it the 80-something, $90 million that a whole other case has penalized Trump because he sexually assaulted, violated E. Jean Carroll, and defamed her after that, and behaved in court in a way that apparently, as it's interpreted, the jury thought was so repulsive that it cost him in the penalty that they came up with. And I think we also had the good news that Trump, at least in the week of jury selection, seems to have behaved in a way which really would have put off the American people to see. And maybe a little bit of that is percolating through, but it sure would be nice if this were televised so that what the jury has put off with the American people. So I think that the rules that prevent this from being televised mean that the rule of law is not really properly structured to deal with this situation where the American people really need to see something. But you go to war with the army you got, as Rumsfeld said. And the press will be reporting some things. And some people will be hearing it, and it will get absorbed. Stormy Daniels and E. Jean Carroll, what kind of guy is it that deals with women the way he does? The Access Hollywood tape. What kind of guy is it? How many people are going to be thinking of that? Because, it is important what happens in terms of the electorate holding him accountable. I think we're going to get the conviction in Manhattan. I don't know what the odds are on Las Vegas, but I would bet heavily he's going to be convicted. I mean, we've gotten convictions whenever these thugs have been tried. Manafort, Roger Stone, we get convictions. As Weissman pointed out, there was this MAGA woman who said she loved Trump, but she paid attention as a juror, and she simply had to convict Manafort because they got the goods on these guys. And they've got the goods. The judge will tell the jury, if you find that this about the business records and this about campaign related laws that got violated in the state of New York or federal or both, if you find that both of these are true, then you are beyond a reasonable doubt, then you must convict. If you don't find either of those, but they'll find it. Yeah, I've been impressed listening to the various legal people, and this has been an era of so much legal education for people, news junkies like me. And they say, they talk about the jury with such respect. I wouldn't have known that people like, again, Andrew Weissman's my favorite of the gang, but everybody seems to think that from their experience, you can pretty well trust a jury made up of American citizens to do their job responsibly. I think that that's great news. I am not in a position to say that that isn't true. It was more favorable than I would have guessed. And so I think we're going to get the conviction. I don't know how it's going to, and that will be holding him accountable. People talk though, like, well, what's the punishment going to be? I mean, there's jail time that goes with it. If it were anybody else, and people keep on saying, well, they're not going to put him in jail, maybe house arrest. People are afraid to talk about putting him in jail because they're afraid of the reaction. Well, maybe that's smart. Maybe I'd be wrong about this, but I've been watching this unfolding battle between democracy and fascism for 30 years. And every time the good guy's side holds back out of fear of provoking the other side, that has not been a successful strategy. And so I am suspicious that this fear of putting Trump in jail, like when he violates, he's obviously testing the court. He keeps on doing this. He keeps on testing them. And if it was anybody else, they would throw him in jail. Why would you not throw him in jail to make the point that nobody is above the law? No special treatment. You behave like a criminal, you'll be treated like a criminal. I don't see why you wouldn't do that. And if the other side doesn't like it, well, let's have that discussion. Is this guy a criminal? So we've had some success on those civil trials, and something good is unfolding in this Manhattan trial that does have the effect of reminding people of some dimensions of the really rotten qualities of this man, like how he treats women, that connection, how he cheats at everything. He cheated in 2016. He called upon the Russians to help him. That's cheating all by itself. And here he is cheating about keeping and hiring the National Enquirer to attack his political enemies. Bogus stories about Hillary and Ted Cruz and such. To buy into a powerful media outlet, to get them to be your propaganda wing, giving you service of hardly limited, barely limited value in a campaign where the American people are going to have to choose based on the information they've gotten. That's not okay. And cheating is not okay in general. He cheated on his wife. He cheated in the 2016 election with the National Enquirer. He cheated in his taxes and his loan getting. He cheated in the 2020 election by trying to get these fake electors. He's a cheater. So there's something to be conveyed that maybe people will make the connections that this is a portrait of a man, the man who behaves in all these ways, all of which show just what kind of a broken, dangerous, destructive person he is. Lying is a form of cheating. The big lie is a form of cheating. Trying to steal an election by deceiving people. Well, there are some good things that have been developing. And when I talk about the fake electors, that reminds, there are now several different states that are indicting not just the fake electors, but also the people who were conducting a national campaign to overthrow an election. And these are people right around Trump. In Georgia, Trump's in that indictment. It's disappointing how that seems to have gotten sidetracked. I don't fully understand that there was any good reason that there should be any less righteous energy pushing that along, but it seems like somehow the air got taken out. But other states, there are at least two states, Michigan and Arizona, which have now brought indictments like with Mark Meadows and Boris Epstein and inner circle Trump people who will be tried in state court, who will be in the vice that even however the election goes, these are state prosecutions that will go forward and for which there will be no pardons from Trump, even if he wins. So they will be in a vice, and some of them will probably lead to indictments of Trump. But if he's president, that will not be the victory of the rule of law. I think we should get rid of that Department of Justice thing that says you can't indict a sitting president. There's a story about how that came into being, and a whole lot more was made of it. It had to do with Agnew back in '74. It is not, I've heard it argued convincingly to me that there's no need for that. But I can't say that I'm qualified to say that it really would be okay to be able to indict a sitting president. We don't want the law to be abused and used as a way, part of the struggle for power. So maybe, okay. But anyway, Trump won't be indicted. If he wins the election, he won't be indicted in Arizona, no matter what Mark Meadows may be willing to spill about him. But still, the battle goes on, and the fact that these things are being prosecuted, and it isn't just Georgia and Michigan and Arizona. Nevada is also, and I believe something happened in Wisconsin about these things, but I think it was kind of weak somehow how it went down. I think that going after these things is very important for the protection of the rule of law and democracy against the force of fascism, because all of these things are part of a political force that, besides this election, is comprehensively making war on American democracy. So I think we should go all out to make sure that anybody that got involved in illegitimate attempts to break down our constitutional system pays the price. Anyway, there are a lot of things that are happening at the good level in terms of the rule of law versus Donald Trump. He's losing some battles. Points are being scored on him. He's being exposed. The biggest news of the week, as far as I'm concerned, has to do with a major Trump victory. A really huge development, not altogether unexpected given what we'd already seen, but sort of putting the maraschino cherry of the complete corruption, moral corruption of today's Supreme Court in how they are conducting themselves in terms of that battle between Trump and the rule of law. I saw a video where George Conway, who has done a lot of things as a never-Trumper that I very much respect and appreciate, but who I think, seriously misses the boat in a recent YouTube interview with, I forget her name at the moment, but on the Bulwark. It's an hour-long interview, and the title of the thing is basically we should all calm down about what happened this week in the Supreme Court. And just to take that as the thesis, I think, on the contrary, it is hard to overstate how worked up we should all be about what we have seen this week in the Supreme Court. Now, Conway has in mind, we don't know what they're going to decide. Yes, these are legitimate questions about, various scenarios that might happen and under what circumstances can a president be criminally responsible for any crimes, and what circumstances are they protected by some kind of presidential immunity. Let me just, I heard at least a couple people point out the utter hypocrisy of their taking things down the road that they took them. They've got a case in front of them. The general ethic with respect to the Supreme Court or whatever is you decide the case in front of you. This week, the Supreme Court was just at least 4 of these people were utterly determined to avoid looking at the case in front of them. When Jackson or the Dreeben, the prosecution, Jack Smith's guy, we're trying to get them to look at the particular things that were charged in the indictment of the trial in question. And because there's really, they would say, quite rightly, there's no question about whether these acts are protected by presidential immunity. That would completely blow up the whole concept of the Constitution. And there are these amicus briefs of various kinds which show that these actions, our founders surely would have said, were crimes that could be prosecuted. That's the kind of executive they clearly were creating in this Constitution. It's just, nobody should take seriously for a moment the question of whether this case should go forward. And this former president who tried to overthrow the constitutional order can be prosecuted for that attempt. George Conway thinks we shouldn't be too excited about a Supreme Court that was just palpably asking itself, how do we protect this criminal from being held accountable by the rule of law before the election? Now, if Trump wins the election, which I don't expect, delaying the trial so it can't happen before the election is giving the criminal a huge victory, because he can kill the whole thing anyway. So we should be hoping that Donald Trump will already have been held accountable by the citizenry in the election, in which case the trials of Donald Trump at the federal level will be able to go forward. But in the meanwhile, we've got a really serious problem that the Supreme Court, contrary to what they obviously should have been doing since Jack Smith went to them and asked them to behave like the Supreme Court of 1974 did with Nixon's tapes, which is to meet the public good by getting things decided quickly, because the public good required that the truth come out at this point. Jack Smith said that back in December, and the Supreme Court had every opportunity to do what the country needed it to do in the light of the fact that this guy is a threat to the survival of American constitutional democracy and the rule of law. The Supreme Court sent it back. They slow walked it in every way conceivable. And then last week, they pretty well forecast that they've got an approach here completely unnecessary, that's completely going to avoid opening the way for the trial to proceed. Going to lay out questions about, well, what's a public act and what's a private act that the courts below them are going to have to wrestle with, which is completely unnecessary for the task at hand. But the Supreme Court has regarded the task at hand as helping Trump with delay. Delay is all that Trump has ever had going for him because the evidence is overwhelming. It is not really questionable whether the prosecution in any of these cases would be able to demonstrate that he committed serious crimes. All he's got is delay, and the Supreme Court, completely contrary to what the amicus brief from the historians and constitutional experts about the era of our founding persuaded them, was essentially what the Supreme Court absolutely clearly had to decide. As Neil Katyal said, this was an easy case, but they pretend that it's difficult just to help Trump get delay. So you got a Supreme Court that is against the rule of law. Even if we knew that this delay wasn't going to help Trump ultimately, and I'll bet that is in fact the case, we have an even bigger problem, that we've got a Supreme Court that, not foolishly, but simply out of their moral bankruptcy and their willingness to violate their oath of office and to act contrary to what their role is supposed to be in this system where they've been elevated to this highest court. We've got Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch giving every sign. Don't worry, Trump, we got your back here. We'll keep the rule of law from holding you accountable and give you a chance to kill the damn case if you happen to win, and keep the electorate. I mean, it's the same crime in a way that Trump committed with the National Enquirer, is to prevent the electorate from knowing what they should know. The Supreme Court is in on a corrupt deal where they have taken an oath to play a role as adjudicating, using the law and the Constitution between the different sides of a conflict, or taking into account the prosecution and the defense and the right way of apportioning things between them. That's supposed to be their rule, and they did just the opposite. That tells us not just a problem with this case. That tells us that we've got a Supreme Court that is an instrument of a political force. And it's the force that Donald Trump leads. And it is, in every respect, on every issue we could look at, it is a force that's pushing things in the wrong direction. I like the locution, a coherent force that consistently works to make the world more broken. The Supreme Court is acting as part of the same force that's nominating Donald Trump, that has obstructed Ukrainian aid, a whole list of things, fights against doing stuff about climate change. Every place you look, they're doing something destructive. So it does consistently work to make the human world more broken. And here's a Supreme Court whose job it is to be the defender of the rule of law, which is one of the things that humankind has been able to create that keeps things from being really broken. Democracy versus fascism is in some ways what we're dealing with in America right now. In some ways, it's a representative of an age-old problem about whether you're going to have power controlled, like with the rule of law, or power uncontrolled as the gangster seizes power and creates some kind of fascistic regime. That's the problem we face in America right now, and the battle between Trump and the rule of law is part of it. And the Supreme Court's sacred territory now being under the control not just of a party. I mean, it would be bad enough if it was that partisan in some, flip the coin kind of way in the pocket for one or two of the two major parties. That would not be okay, regardless of the party. That's not their job. But in this case, the Supreme Court that George Conway says we shouldn't be too upset about has blatantly shown itself to be part of the force of a party that's gone over to the dark side. It's not like other major American parties in our history. Maybe you can find in the 1850s something roughly at all comparable, but I think this is really basically unprecedented. And this Supreme Court seems to be controlled. There's not enough on the other side in it. 5 people can be the Supreme Court. It's interesting that right now, according to the likes of Weissman and Katyal, they see 4 votes on each side, with the Chief Justice, John Roberts, sort of like the swing voter. And they can see it going either way. We shouldn't be in a position like this. And John Roberts has been willing in the past to play a pretty dirty role in terms of the rising force of fascism. I think Citizens United and the gutting of the Voting Rights Act constitute disgraceful performances in which the Chief Justice voted for the side that is now aligned behind Donald Trump and protecting him from being held accountable for the serious crimes he committed in trying to overthrow the will of the people. How it's going to come down. My suspicion is that there will be a majority that throws it back to the lower courts in some stupid way that will eat up the rest of the time. There has been some talk that there are possibilities, depending on the way the Supreme Court charges the lower courts, what it requires them to figure out. That some questions that might be thrown to Judge Chutkan, and she's got the case that should have been begun in January, except for the Supreme Court's siding with the criminal, that Judge Chutkan could call an evidentiary hearing, which means that in order, she can, I guess, sort of pretend, in order to answer this question that the Supremes have thrown onto my desk, we need to hear from all these witnesses about this and that and that and that. I think it's pretense. I mean, I think that the real idea that's being floated here is that it would put her in the position of doing something which would be rescuing a bit of the ability of the rule of law to hold him accountable, which is to say, to at least through the legal proceeding of these evidentiary hearings, expose the American people to the picture of what happened. And that could be valuable. It was valuable when the January 6th committee did it. But it ain't the same as a trial. It doesn't have a jury representing all of us who listen to the case and then hand down a verdict. It's nice to get a verdict. It's nice to have a responsible group of citizens basically give a message to all the other millions of Americans whom they're representing, a jury of his peers, our all fellow Americans, to give the message, we've heard all the evidence, and this guy's guilt has been established beyond a reasonable doubt. I think that people regard the jury as in some way representing what they would have concluded. I don't know if I have any basis for thinking that people think about things like that, but I hear in the polls that there are people who would be, who would like to get a verdict. And with respect to the most serious crimes, it seems clear at the very minimum, regardless of the decision that the Supreme Court eventually hands down. And I don't think they're going to endorse what Trump has proposed. I don't think that at all. They know it's garbage. There's no way they could do that. But they can run out the clock for him, hand down something, knocking Trump's thing, not creating the grounds for a dictatorship, but having implicitly made it possible for the force of fascism to defeat the rule of law, in at least delaying the trial. So it would be good, and I gather from Weissman, he reports that several other legal minds out there have come up with some other ideas. And so the rule of law has been dealt a significant defeat by the Supreme Court, because this is the most important case, even more. And the only trial we're getting of a criminal sort is the least important of the four. It's less important than than the RICO charges in Atlanta. It's less important than the Espionage Act's case with the documents in Florida, and it's way less important than the case that the Supreme Court has basically swept off the board for all political purposes. But there are possible ways that the rule of law can regain at least some of the territory that the Supreme Court seems to be really eager to keep out of their control, which is some ways of letting the American people see what a trial would have shown them. Okay, which side is winning? Well, I'm trying to be content with how much the rule of law is winning. The Arizona indictments that came down this week, the way the trial's going forward, the civil cases that he's gotten blown out of the water financially with. I think there's good stuff happening in that battle. But I am surprised to find that the force of fascism has found as much foothold as it has in what should be the force of the rule of law. I mean, there's that judge, what's her name? in Florida. Oh, I'm sure her Loose Cannon. No, not Loose. But Judge Cannon down in Florida, who's dealing equally corruptly in her own way with making the judge the accomplice of the criminal. I wouldn't have. I mean, there have been a lot of Trump judges who have not done that, including the some of the judges that brutally reversed her early on in this case. I think what we've got in this Florida thing is a particular judge with no moral responsibility to what her oath requires of her. And plus a really unfortunate luck of the draw, I gather, that it wasn't corrupt that somehow she got this case again. At least I don't think so. But it really has pretty well ruined the case, at least in the short run. I keep on praying that Jack Smith will take a bold and successful move to get the circuit court to take the case away from her. She's just, and I don't like some of these legal guys that are sort of beating around the bush when they're talking about her, ascribing too much to incompetence. She's not done this kind of thing before. No, see what's in front of your eyes, please. Let's stop pussyfooting with this kind of thing. Let's call what we see. But, that one judge and Trump with all of his indictments, and it's not like all is lost with this document case. If she's going to manage to prevent it from happening before the election, I'm pretty sure. I'd love to be wrong about that. Nobody's declared that that's the case, but she just refuses to make decisions, and she creates all kinds of bogus problems for the prosecution. I mean, she's clearly on Trump's side, which is basically the side of delay. But the big thing, of course, is the Supreme Court. I think that Trump is going to lose the election. These prosecutions won't be as important after the election, but they'll be of some value still. It will be important to show the American people and a jury of Americans just all the terrible things that Trump has been doing, and how we should thank our lucky stars, Americans should be saying to themselves in 2025, that we didn't put this guy back in the Oval Office. Better late than never, but it would be better to get more and more Americans realizing what the nature of that choice would be. And how you get that across to Americans who don't already see it, that is one of the biggest questions I've ever seen. It's hard for me to quite imagine how anybody cannot see everything that's important to see about this guy. I mean, with Richard Nixon and with W and some other people who did a lot to sort of introduce some fascistic elements into our power system at certain times. There was a mixture of things, and there was also the use of the appearance of certain kinds of piety and moral commitment that obscured from a lot of good, decent Americans who were following those people the real nature of what animated that leadership, the extent to which there is a criminality in both the Nixon presidency and in the W presidency with its torture and torture memos and various other problems. But they both looked really pretty good, particularly to people of a certain cultural mindset where certain kinds of postures of piety are part of the language of the culture. And there's generally an agreement to buy the facade of things that are covering up some things that are also there, but not with Trump. With Trump, it's, the wolf without any of that sheep's clothing. And it becomes a challenge for me, which I'm not satisfied with how much I've met. Never tried harder on any question. There's a challenge to understand all these Americans who don't see what's really not at all hidden. And how many of them don't see it and how many of them see it, but it's okay with them? I also am confused on that. I've never been able to, or is there some way that those two can combine in certain kinds of minds? I think probably there is. At the one level, you know that this guy's a thug, but you don't allow that to become clear in consciousness. Consciously, you buy into the idea that supporting this thug is supporting something good, in spite of all the evidence that that's not what you're supporting. There are things that go on in the human mind that I've spent since my mid-teens trying to go into depth psychology and understand sort of like the undercurrent ways in which people come to beliefs and plug into certain motivations and have various symbolic meanings so that the world around them takes on a certain cast. And I still can't really grasp what all is going on with our fellow Americans. But I do see that there's a kind of brokenness that has to be dealt with, and it's important that we make an effort to deal with it, which also requires that we make an effort to understand what the nature of it is and do the best we can, which is why one of I think the last topic I've got for today, ultimately saving American democracy will require dealing with the Republican base. So let me turn that off. That is part of what we got to do. It's just out there. And in the meanwhile, part of that thing is to deal with all those people who, at the moment, might, for whatever reason, pull the lever for Donald Trump in November and move their consciousness in whatever ways will work toward their no longer finding that something acceptable as an outcome, and instead pulling the lever for Joe Biden, who's the only other person who will be president in 2029, barring, presidential succession, It's one of those two guys. And there are people who for whatever reason, might vote for Trump, who, and I don't know how many of them could be moved, but the presumption is that their perceptions, if they're changed, some of those people would migrate away. And we've got lots of evidence in the recent elections that there is a meaningful chunk that can be moved. And part of the task in terms of the Trump versus the rule of law has got to do with going all out to expose Donald Trump as the criminal that he is. And let me make a transition to the second topic, which is got to do with what we're called upon to do right now. as Americans. And I'm talking to anyone listening on the assumption that you care deeply that American democracy survive and that we not be taken over by this fascistic force, which is about to make Donald Trump its nominee for president. In a sense, what's important as a challenge for people like us is to rise to the occasion when something so big is at stake. I like to use the word sacred, though I'm a little afraid with people with a secular worldview to use it. But the things that we have profound feelings of the meaningful value of, like people having the right to live their own lives according to their own conscience, to be able to speak their truths, to be able to live without fear that there will be unaccountable power seizing them and dragging them off to torture chambers. That these are wonderful things. These are values that we hold sacred. Whatever imperfections we can point to in the Constitution, and I've spent a lot of years occasionally addressing some of those things I really wish were different in the Constitution, like the Electoral College. But when we think about what it represents as a set of protections of humanity against some of the nightmares that have dominated human history, because we haven't had those protections like the rule of law. We really need to be impassioned to rise to the occasion, because when the sacred is in danger, we're called upon to be heroes. And that brings me to talk about our stories. Let me write down, I want to talk about heroes. And well, I'll talk about it a second now. I've been calling my live stream a man on a mission, which was meaningful to me. It certainly describes, it lets you know where I'm coming from. It's really the heart of where I'm coming from. And I believed that the people I wanted to reach would see that and they'd say, well, I wonder what this guy's mission is. But I have a son who's made a deep study of messaging. I really respect how deeply he's gone into it. And I don't always know how right he is in his conclusions, but he's really seems very insightful when I talk with him. And I'm willing to be, he's the one who kicked me into doing this genre. Overcame my, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks hesitation. He says that it's a mistake to represent the live stream to the audience that I'm seeking, which my mission requires me to get a following. By making it about me, I'm the man on a mission. He says what it should be is something that provides the bait that people are looking for. I think he had a more eloquent way of putting it, but I could see that there was truth to that, because I know that I go on the web and I'll click the things that seem to promise to give me something that I already know that I want in some way. Um, like if there's some really good news in the political realm having to do with the forces of democracy scoring well against the forces of fascism, I'll click that because my heart yearns for that. Well, we've gone back and forth about a couple of ideas. And one that we've come up with that we're working on, and I don't know if it's good or not, but it might be, um, having to do uh, with our rallying to be the heroes that we need. And I'm thinking that we have in our minds an image of people who, when the sacred is being threatened, do rise to the occasion and succeed in protecting it. And that leads me to read this piece, which has the title, Our Stories Teach Us, Don't Give Up. This is my op-ed piece that's going to be in the newspapers that run me every week, usually of a political nature, but I often try to put in something that goes to a different level than to the things that divide us in these times. I'm writing to what happened here? I, let's see, view post is what I want. I'm writing in a region that is 2-to-1 Republican, and I use my platform, my weekly platform in the weekend newspapers, often to challenge that majority out there. But this time I'm talking at a different level. Many a fairy tale ends with, and they lived happily ever after. And not just fairy tales. There are tons of stories, myths, movies, etc., in which we end with the gratification of our heroes successfully achieving their goals. In these difficult times, I've felt especially drawn to such narratives, which, with their wish-fulfilling endings, where, and then a couple of bullet points, the guy gets the girl. The good guy gets revenge on the bad guy who'd done him wrong. The nobody at the beginning ends up a somebody famous for big achievements. But the question arises, if this is about vicarious wish fulfillment, why do we have to wait until the end for that gratification? Why do our stories end with happily ever after, rather than begin with all our dreams come true? Consider, how would it feel if our movie started with our protagonists having all their wishes already granted? Happily married, loving family, successful career, in a world of peace, goodwill, general prosperity, and a vibrant cultural life. As soon as I imagined such a beginning in such a movie, I realized I'd be quickly bored. I would not feel the hero's happiness, the way I do enjoyably participate in the joy of getting together at last with one's beloved, the satisfaction of destroying a hateful enemy, the sense of pride in the achievements, fame, and recognition of the character with whom I have been identifying as he or she traveled a path beset by many obstacles, challenges, and setbacks. Apparently, I conclude, we humans have been wired we have been wired to have a narrative experience in which, one, we vicariously face serious difficulties, and two, work our way successfully toward the feeling of fulfillment. The difficult path to get to happiness seems to be essential to the point of our taking that journey through the story. Which leads to the question, why would we be wired that way? In an evolutionary perspective, and my whole big picture is something that has got to do with what do we see in the evolutionary perspective, the answer would take the form, those who were wired that way were more likely to get their DNA into the future than those who weren't. That's basically what we mean by natural selection. And a little reflection suggests a reason why being wired that way might contribute to survival. The stories teach us not to give up, despite what would seem to be very long odds. Our ancestors, over the countless generations, would of course have faced a great many difficulties. Many must have been the times when a realistic assessment of the chances of ultimately succeeding, or more to the point, ultimately surviving, must have looked daunting. Those who allowed themselves to be daunted, who faced such long odds they felt discouraged from even making the effort, would surely have failed. But once in a while, some of those who try, even despite odds 100 to 1 against success or survival, will succeed. And only those who act on hope rather than resignation to failure will make it through. Make it through, meaning pass their DNA along into the future. So there's the evolutionary payoff. The idea of don't give up despite the formidable obstacles helps people keep going and not surrender to the weight of the difficulties, which helps them survive. Which also means that it is advantageous for us to learn to envision the hopeful scenario before us in our lives. That's what our stories, with their difficult paths leading to happily ever after endings, teach us. If our heroine is a mere understudy, we know that we who identify with her will soon rise to be the acclaimed star. If out of the millions who buy lottery tickets, the one our protagonist buys, as in the movie It Could Happen to You, is the one who buys the winning ticket. In the biopic, like that of Thomas Edison with his 10,000 failed attempts to invent the light bulb, the failures will just be the precursor to a history-making success. Although being sentenced to serve as a Roman galley slave was generally a death sentence, our hero, Ben-Hur, will not only survive, but will become a prince of Rome and will avenge himself on the Roman who betrayed him. When we endure through our identification with Cinderella, her cruel exploitation by her stepmother and stepsisters, we are eventually rewarded by her rising far above them, becoming the bride of the handsome prince she met at the ball, from which they'd sought to exclude her. All of these rehearse the experience of improbable success. Evolution, I imagine, has instilled in us a motivation to create and to vicariously experience such scenarios. The repetitive experience of such rewarding scenarios, ultimately achieving success despite the difficulties, reinforces in us the willingness to strive to get through the difficulties of the moment rather than yield to despair. Don't give up without trying is a message, I think, that evolution has inscribed in our hearts and that the stories of our cultures reinforce. There is always the hope of beating the odds. It is because life is served by hope that we have so often heard the saying, where there's life, there's hope. And that hope appears in the Bible as so important a virtue. And that the Greek myth of Pandora depicts hope as the one thing that remains to help humankind deal with all the troubles that have been loosed in the world. I see that as connecting with the idea of let's become the heroes that we need, or however it might be put. To be inspired the way the spirit of pursuing against the odds that we see in movie after movie, that there is a will. Now, what would that look like in the America of today? And what would that look like in the larger picture of the human civilization that we're part of, that I think has, a toss-up whether it's going to destroy itself or not? I think that we can see what heroes would do. They would throw themselves passionately into the battle to protect what's sacred at whatever level, in whatever way. That rather than giving in to the fear of, maybe Trump will be elected president, everybody with that fear has to, is called upon, if they would be heroes, to find the kind of heart within that throws them into the battle, that does what is possible for them to do to make sure that the better side prevails in that battle. The example of people becoming heroes that comes to my mind, there's a book called, oh golly, I hate when I block on things of this sort. A longshoreman, Eric, wrote a book, well, it will come to me. He said that Churchill cast the British people as heroes. This is in World War II. And that they proceeded to play that role. And I think it was hugely fortifying to Great Britain to be cast as heroes effectively. So I guess we should be looking at what would it look like, this movie that we could be part of, this story of the goodness in America rallying now to protect what's best about America from something that represents what's worst in America, whether it be greed or white supremacy or a refusal to care about the common good, a willingness to feed only one's own lust for power, all those things that have been that have assembled on the other side. That the people who want an America, who yearn for an America in which the rule of law and not the likes of Donald Trump and the fascist power are guiding us along. We want the world. We want the movie to end the way the movies that meet this criterion. That at the end, the good people of Bedford Falls have rallied to save their society from becoming Pottersville in It's a Wonderful Life. What would it look like in America right now if all of us who really do care about rallying as a side, who want that to be the way our history unfolds from here, that we have not only the victory of Joe Biden over Donald Trump in the coming election, but a blowout and movement. Well, let's just stick with the immediate battle. That's the one that we got to rally to. I mean, there are battles to be fought from now on in terms of whether we'll get our act together as a species to survive for the long haul on this planet. But let's take things one thing at a time. And the first thing we got to do is rally ourselves to defeat Donald Trump. And so if you were that hero, what would you do? What would that look like? What contribution are you in a position to make, rather channeling the energy that goes frittered up in fear, taking hope, taking the fear, just enough fear to maintain the motivation of this is something I'm willing to go all out to protect? What would that look like? And if this live stream series that I'm doing, maybe under the title, let's rally ourselves to be the heroes we need, or whatever the title would be. How would I do something like what Churchill did for the British people, and what Capra showed in It's a Wonderful Life, catalyzed in Bedford Falls around the virtue of Jimmy Stewart, who's been sacrificing his whole life for the common good, and then the common good becomes the hero to save him and their town. What would that look like on this? That's what I'm thinking I should be asking myself. Okay, we'll change to yet another topic, which is a big one and is at a large chunk of the better human story that I set as my mission to convey, which deals with democracy versus fascism, but also deals with some larger questions about the meaning of what's happened to our species, and has focused attention on the inevitable consequences of a creature doing what we alone have done in the history of life on this planet, which is to extricate ourselves from the niche in which we evolved biologically and become the very first species to invent our own way of life, and how that unleashes a destructive force that's inevitable and that really puts a lot of things in a very different light. And one of the things it puts into a different light is the question of human nature. The topic I've got on that list of topics, and should I go back to, well, let's see, I gotta turn, okay, maybe I don't have to turn anything. I think I'm back, yeah. Let me change how you think about human nature. Let me say, first of all, I invite you to consider how we conceive what kind of creatures we are is bound to be very consequential. Is that obvious to you? It's obvious to me. We have all kinds of evidence in our world that people expectations tend to be self-fulfilling. Studies done of teachers, if they think that if they're told the students are very bright, or told that the students are, basically losers, the expectations of the teacher plays a big role, and the expectations of the students plays a big role. Now, We look around the world and we look at the history of our species, and we see a lot of ugliness. I claim that I can prove that the ugliness we see in human history and around us in the world right now, a lot of ugliness we can see in the world around us right now. Ukraine, Gaza, the American political arena, a lot of ugliness. That ugliness that we see in the larger picture is not a reflection of human nature. I claim that I can prove that. Um, because I can prove, and that's what this book back here, The Parable of the Tribes, proves, that we inevitably, that the step onto the path of civilization inevitably unleashes a destructive social evolutionary force. I claim that I can prove it. I've been looking at that idea for 54 years. So there's a destructive force which is systemic, which mandates that any creature that steps onto the path of civilization will have its civilization evolve in predictable directions that are not chosen by the people, by that creature, not a reflection of that creature's nature, but a reflection of the inevitable selective process, which favors those options that are able to prevail in a war of all against all. I'm not going to go further down that road right now because I want to talk about the consequences of that. Just humor me for a moment. What if it were the case that civilization, as it has developed over the last 10,000 years, and I draw the line when people start inventing their own way of life, creating a different way of life from one that was continuous with our primate ancestors by gardening and herding and otherwise taking control of things which they used to just depend on what the natural order provided, and like other hunting and gathering species. But as soon as they started doing that, and that's about 10 or 12,000 years ago, and it didn't happen in the same place, moment everywhere, but over the course of, say, 5,000 plus years, in various places, there is a process whereby you go from hunting-gathering societies to horticultural societies to agricultural societies, and you end up with, sort of the same thing in each place, some kind of an empire ruled over by some kind of a few who have been able to have a disproportionate say because they were really good at exploiting the anarchy that existed in that system that emerged among civilized societies because they were no longer in any natural order. It was anarchy. It generated a war of all against all. Okay. Not human nature choosing that human option become the one that gets a disproportionate say over how civilization will evolve. It is the system, the selective process that inevitably emerges when you've changed the whole system of life by introducing a whole new thing that was not crafted in conjunction with the whole system, like the way predators and prey and parasites and hosts evolve together, creating the order that's necessary for what it is that can survive into the future. It requires that the relationship between the wolf and the sheep be okay as part of the pattern of survival, not only for the wolves, but for the sheep. But in this system, only what can prevail in a war of all against all can survive and spread. It ain't the creature's nature. So if you'll posit to me that we're living in a civilization that in some meaningful way has not been shaped by the free choices of people, that we've been driven by a force that we unwittingly unleashed. If you grant me that, just for the sake of argument, how do we think about human nature? And why shouldn't we think that what we see in the world around us is a window into human nature? Well, let me use as an example some research that was done by a psychologist at the University of Wisconsin, I think it was, a fellow named Harlow, on rhesus monkeys, 1950s. Research they probably wouldn't have been allowed to do now, but and rhesus monkeys are not, civilized creatures like us. But like us, they are creatures that emerge with a nature which consists, in a sense, of two different layers. There's what's born in, there's the genes, there's all that DNA that says that the rhesus baby that's born or the human baby that's born. And you could say the same about puppies and kittens. It's got something significant that's already in the DNA. But it's also a creature that is intended to be unfinished as it emerges into the world. It is intended to be that the process of realizing its nature also has a learned component. It will have experiences. It will have a mom, for example, that's going to treat it in ways that she's been genetically programmed to treat it, usually. And I've had cats that delivered kittens, and it's wonderful the way, they're most all I've ever encountered. They're ready to be good moms. Of course, good moms help their kittens survive. That's what gets DNA into the future. They're going to have experiences. And they're going to be particular experiences, and they're going to be able to adjust into the particular environment that they're born into. I don't know where the line is drawn. I don't think protozoa have any completion that's required after they come into existence. But I don't really know much about protozoa. But I do know that it really matters what happens to kittens, because I've raised a lot of cats, and I try to be a really good father to the cats that I raise, and I think it really matters that they become who they're going to become, and they could have become something very different. It does really matter what their nature will take a particular form, because that out of experience. And also in the case of humans, much more than with rhesus monkeys, way more, we're going to be shaped by our cultures. Unlike the rhesus monkey, who may have some dimensions of culture that in a group, and I don't remember what I know about rhesus bands, but humans have had culture going on for a long time, and it's clear in the evolutionary record that that being cultural creatures has been a major strategy of ours for, if you count stone tools we know about, it goes back a few million years, and domestication of fire and painting on walls and stuff like that. The more cultural we have become, the more we will be born to be completed, in a sense. It seems clear from the study of the human capacity for language that we are born to learn a language that's being spoken around us. But we need to be completed by the culture, because we're not born to speak English or Mandarin Chinese. Whatever they're talking around us, we're going to learn. That's an example of how we get completed. So going back to if we got a civilized society, world that's been shaped by weirdness, well, you can start to see how there might be some way in which people will become something different than what shows human nature, because they're going to be growing up in a world that is maybe fundamentally different from what they are born expecting. What happened with the rhesus monkeys is that Harlow separated a bunch of newborn rhesus monkeys into two groups. One of those groups, he gave a mother surrogate that you could suck milk out of. That was a wire cage, just a wire cage covered with something, uh, soft cloth of some kind that you could cuddle up against comfortably. And then the other group of monkeys, he gave a wire cage, but nothing to cuddle with. And then he wanted to see what would uh, what would be the difference between these two groups, these two different kinds of mothers, the cuddleable and the uncuddleable. And it turned out that there was a huge difference, that the rhesus monkeys that had nothing more comfortable than wire to snuggle up against were completely screwed up. They couldn't function in a rhesus group. They couldn't form a successful relationship with a mate. They couldn't pass their DNA into the future. They're born expecting something that they didn't get. If you want to know what the nature of a rhesus monkey is, you don't look at something that was set up to be opposed to meeting the needs that the creature is born to pursue getting met. Well, if you have a civilization that has been shaped by the selection for the ways of power are pretty different from what gratifies human needs. There's overlap between them, like whether you're the pharaoh having hundreds of thousands of slaves build you monuments, or whether you're a benign society, which is geared toward human fulfillment. In both cases, you want people to have enough to eat to survive. Dairy farmers take decent care of their cows and even decent care of their meat cattle, but only so far as it's required to keep them producing milk or to get them to produce good meat in a good period of time. It's not the same thing as a caring regime, and if you've got the demands of power that the society needs to meet in order to be among those that get to survive a war of all against all, you've got babies being born into a society that's going to be dealing with their inborn needs in some very suboptimal ways. There will be what power is fed by and what human fulfillment is fed by in terms of what people get and what's demanded of them by their society are pretty different. Just how different, one can have a discussion of being. That book, The Parable of the Tribes, argues that it's been pretty considerably different. But I don't really claim to know, and how would you quantify it anyway? There's a lot that's broken in this world. And we are to some degree, in the position of those rhesus monkeys, that our civilization is that wire mother that doesn't have the cuddleable material, to some degree. And just as those rhesus monkeys became incapable of living a normal rhesus life, and incapable of manifesting who they are as creatures, so also we who live in these societies that over the course of millennia have been shaped by the demands of power, at odds with giving the human baby all that it is born expecting, giving it some, but really opposed in other ways, like teaching lessons about human sexuality, just to name one major arena in which civilization has made considerable war on the inborn animal. We are born into a system that requires us to internalize moral demands as the good is this, and what you need, when it goes against what we, the system for power maximization, say a person should do and be, if it goes against, then what you need and what you want, you shouldn't want. Maybe you'll even be told it's evil. All of that, internalizing that, is in itself a kind of brokenness. And what the ramifications are of that, how far it goes, how that compares with the inability of the rhesus babies raised by wire mothers to manifest rhesus nature, well, at least to whatever extent that we are in that position, to that extent that the civilizations that we have created have disabled us from manifesting exactly who we are deep down by nature. We've been broken to one degree or another by having to live in a world in which the selection for the ways of power has been as powerful as it has been in shaping the human world. I often represent it as that if there's anarchy, the war of all against all, what emerges, and I can point to times and places that prove this, what emerges is that gangsters, warlords, are what rise to the top. It's a selection process. It is not reflection of the nature of the creature. And when people whose ancestors had been freely running hunting-gatherers who lived in more or less egalitarian bands, become slaves, treated as property, like I think the majority of people did in the original civilizations that emerged in the various places in the world, or if not actual slaves, really quite exploited and dominated, and far from the freedom that our Constitution tries to give us. That's going to make for a lot of brokenness. And that out of that brokenness, there's going to emerge a lot of ugliness. Just like the dysfunctionality of the, let me see if I'm going to get, yeah, this book, Out of Weakness, I'll go with where it is there. That was the book after the Parable of Tribes. Once you get into a war of all against all, you're going to inflict so much trauma, so much inner warfare, that people are going to get broken in a variety of ways. And they happen to be the ways that the force of brokenness is able to exploit to reinforce itself. And we can see that in America today, the rise of a broken person to be such a leader, and how he's tapping into the brokenness that sort of is the unfortunate underbelly of American civilization, the various components that we have seen operating over the generations in the century of things like corporate greed and racial hostility and supremacy, white supremacy and intolerant Christian nationalism, things like that we can see. There is an alliance that gets formed, and you get brokenness begetting brokenness, and the world gets shaped in that way, and you end up with the spirit of the thug having a disproportionate say on what the world is like, and you get the people being more broken than could possibly tell you exactly who we are by nature. We're better than that. I can't prove, even to my own satisfaction, how much better than that we are. I think I can make a very strong case that we are a lot better than that, and an ironclad place to say we have the potential to be a whole lot better than that. I'm a little confused about how much just letting the natural human being unfold, if we were living in a world that wasn't, where we weren't having to face a destructive force like this. I don't know how good a world we would be able to create. But we have potentialities too that we could develop. It may be that we need to go beyond just realizing who we are by nature and to become instead all that we can be, which is much more of a project of finding our way to make people more whole, so that we're able to become the heroes that we need ourselves to be, and to create a human civilization that's as whole as it needs to be to survive on this planet, rather than to blow itself up in a nuclear holocaust, or to allow a system, an economic system, prevent us from responding responsibly to a climate crisis that could destroy civilization. At least I believe it's powerful enough to threaten that level of catastrophe. That's the kind of hero that we want to rise to. And I believe we got a lot of it right in our hearts already, that we are born to be oriented toward the good, because the good is what's been life-serving. We experience it as good. We love it as the good. And it got inscribed in us evolutionarily to feel that way, because it was correlated with our ancestors being able to conduct themselves in a way that led to their survival. Which lets me transition into the next question. The pursuit of happiness, more than a right, it's an assignment. Now, I've been focused in recent years on another dimension of the evolutionary perspective, and the one that leads to the understanding of the inevitability of the rule of power when you break out of the natural order. I've been tuned in on this stuff about what is it that's born into us. And if you wanted to think about human nature, that is really sort of a treasure trove to identify what's been born into us, because we're not a blank slate. I mean, it's obvious we're not a blank slate. When I was studying human nature in the writing of that book, The Parable of Tribes back there, I was amazed at how people would talk about human nature as if there weren't anything substantial about it. One guy who's very famous talks about, oh, there isn't one human nature. There's, one for every single person. Well, yeah, we're all unique, but, so, we each have a unique face too, but there's still such a thing as the human face. 99.99% of us have two eyes, a nose, a mouth, laid out in the same general floor plan. Yeah. And then there would be people who would talk about, well, human nature is just what, what our various cultures make of us. There's so much diversity among cultures, and they shape people to be so different. Well, yeah, that's true. Anthropology is a really fascinating field, and I spent a lot of years studying hunting-gathering societies and other civilizations and archaic societies and religious. It is really a very rich terrain, all the ways in which people are different. But again, it's obvious that there is fundamentally something that we're born to have that is not complete, that will have varieties between cultures and between individuals, but there's a variety of things that are sort of clearly built into us. And among the things that one has got to do with experiencing things in terms of better and worse. There can be a lot of variation because of experience and individuality and culture, but there are certainly a lot of very concentrated. I mean, if you were to put a pin on the graph for every single manifestation, there would be some areas of great density that people tend to have very strong gravitation in certain directions about things that they consider better and things that they consider worse. There's a capacity for spiritually transformative experience, which I think is also a very important dimension. The fact that we've got that is in itself a clue about what's life-serving, because it wouldn't be there if evolution hadn't selected it. And evolution wouldn't have selected it if the consequence of our ancestors having those kinds of experiences hadn't enhanced their chances of survival. So that tells you all by itself that there's something there that we need to be tuning into, because at least in the ancestral past, it served a purpose that was meant more chances to survive. Life over death is pretty fundamental. And then here's one about the pursuit of happiness. In a way, it's looking at some of the same stuff, but through a particular lens. I'll read it. The Declaration of Independence declares the pursuit of happiness as one of the rights with which we have been endowed by our Creator. That works whether we conceive of that Creator in biblical terms, in the beginning, or we see ourselves as having been created by an evolutionary process that has governed the way life has developed on this planet. Indeed, looking at the idea of the pursuit of happiness in an evolutionary perspective reveals a great deal of importance that needs to be integrated into the current worldview of those who understand things in purely secular terms. One major current of that circular worldview understands reality as confined to what is objective, what is out there. Accordingly, that secular worldview gives short shrift to the experiential realm. The experiential realm, dismissing it as merely subjective. But that evolutionary perspective shows that our inborn experiential tendencies are not merely subjective. We have been endowed with a nature that motivates us to do what helped our ancestors to survive. And to motivate us in life-serving directions, we have been crafted to seek those experiences that make us happy. In other words, evolution, by always choosing what can survive over what cannot, crafted us to experience positively what has enhanced our ancestors' chances of survival. That puts the pursuit of happiness into an importantly new light. The pursuit of happiness is not only a right, it is a kind of assignment. Our inborn nature, with its paths to happiness, again, despite all the differences, there are major arteries that humankind show as paths to happiness, provides us with a kind of roadmap to our survival and to the perpetuation of our kind. We are both happier and more likely to survive and pass our design into the future when, for example, and here we have some bullet points, our bodily needs are well tended to. When we eat, when we are hungry, provide for our comfort with good shelter, maintain our health, have satisfying sexual relationships, and our social environment is operating in satisfying ways. When we humans, whose ancestors have relied on social life for survival since long before we were human, enjoy a harmonious social life filled with goodwill and cooperation. Another point, we find meaningful ways of engaging with the world we live in when we have purposeful and rewarding activities. Nonetheless, we civilized human beings have put ourselves into a challenging position regarding this inborn roadmap. And here we go back to how civilization is not to be seen as a reflection of human nature. Yet, much. The experiential tendencies with which we have been endowed by our biological evolution were selected for their survival value in that niche in which we evolved, and our evolving into what we are took place during the eons before our species embarked on the path of civilization. Difficulties can arise because the world of civilization differs in profound ways from the world inhabited by our pre-civilized ancestors. The challenge is almost visible in the definition I give to civilization. I define civilization this way. Those societies created by a creature that has extricated itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its way of life. That means that we civilized people have unmoored ourselves from that order in which our inborn motivational structure in the pursuit of happiness was designed to work in. An easily grasped and rather benign illustration can be found in the realm of food. For our hunter-gatherer ancestors, getting something sweet was always a good thing. Fruit, the only sweet thing around, is good for us. Likewise with fats and salt. Our ancestors didn't need an off switch because it was always good to seek them out. But in the world we live in now, the pursuit of happiness can lead us astray in a civilization where we can readily get too much of things which our ancestors had to work to get enough of. Sweets, fats, salt. And then here's something I believe that I think I probably would have to work to establish as fully as it maybe should be established, but I don't know that I have at this point. But in the most fundamental ways, like wanting a world at peace, filled with goodwill toward men, the human nature we developed to survive as primates and hunting-gathering families and bands still gives us good guidance. Almost everyone will say that peace is better than war, that love is better than hate, that justice among people is better than injustice. And what's better is what brings us greater happiness. Yes, it is true that our pursuit of happiness might make us obese because our challenges regarding what to eat are not the same as our ancestors. But it's hard to see what fundamental things that were crucial to the survival of bands, of apes, hominids, and finally human hunter-gatherers would not be crucial even in the circumstances of civilization. Making the human world work is basically the same job as it was before we became civilized, just with new elaborations on old challenges, like how to manage human aggression now when the human actors are antagonistic nuclear superpowers. The pursuit of happiness now includes the challenge, facing all of humankind together, of creating a more whole civilization, one that provides both for human fulfillment and that more fully realizes those basic human values that serve to bring happiness. That's the challenge. To be passionate about creating the world that we yearn for because of the basic human values that we find fulfilling when the world is that way, becoming the heroes that we need for American democracy to survive, for human civilization to transform itself into something that can survive for the long haul. That leads to human fulfillment, that chooses life over death, that maps onto something that really deserves to be called a battle between a force of brokenness and a force of wholeness. The force of brokenness being the thing that makes us like rhesus monkeys, the babies without anything to cuddle to. And the force of wholeness that's got to do with tuning in on the guidance that evolution has equipped us to find within ourselves, because it was crafted by a process that always chose what could survive over what could not, and that crafted us to find fulfillment in what's life-serving, or what at least has been life-serving as our species emerged in this experiment of life on Earth. That's the challenge of being a civilized creature. How to create wholeness, even though we're up against a force of brokenness that being civilized creatures inevitably would unleash on the world. A lot of the things that we see around us right now are manifestations of the ways that brokenness can create brokenness. But there's also a force of wholeness that we can utilize to inspire ourselves, because at the experiential realm, the good and the evil we experience in a certain way. At the level of spiritually transformative experience, we can have experiences of the same things that we can experience in mundane terms, in ways that kindle our passions, that enable us to become the heroes that we need for life to conquer death, and for the human experiment with civilization not to end in catastrophe, but with wholeness re-emerging in the systems of life on Earth because we got our act together. I think I'll end there. There's the last topic I was going to talk about was ultimately saving American democracy will require dealing with the Republican base. And I think that is an important truth. The first thing is to win an election. But the next thing is to deal with where that figure has been able to tap into to get his power. Because without the Republican base, he wouldn't have been the Republican nominee in 2016 or 2020 or 2024. Without the Republican base, the Republican Party, which was already a force of fascism when Trump came along, would have been able to escape from underneath this particular extraordinary human being. But the Republican base insisted they were going to stick with him. The Republican base did not make itself this crazy thing. That's another story about propaganda and successful manipulation. But in our times, a whole America, able to function not as a fascist society, but as leader of the free world or something like that, has to deal with something that went wrong in the Republican base that allowed them to look at this extraordinary man who is so obviously the opposite of the kind of person who should be given the powers of the presidency and say, this is our guy. We will not be a healthy society as long as there are tens of millions of people who are carrying with them the frame of consciousness. So heroism is going to be electoral first, but ultimately there's going to have to be some kind of redemption, some kind of salving, some kind of process of recovery of a lot of good people who somehow have been led over to the wrong side in the battle. We need it as a society. They need it for their own spiritual well-being, and the planet needs it for being able to navigate our way into a human future that is viable for the long haul rather than leading to self-destruction. Thank you. Bye-bye.